Welcome to the Word on Wednesday, your midweek online Bible study and devotion at Macville Christian Church for April 22nd, 2026. And today we continue looking at the life of Moses, a man that I'm just fascinated by when I read the Old Testament. I'm fascinated even more every time I read about the life of Moses because he's such a powerful, faith-driven leader of the people of Israel. And where we pick up today is a time in which he was 80 years old, but just beginning to start his ministry. And that's where we read in Exodus chapter 3, starting in verse 1 through verse 6, where we read, "Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he had led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God." I was raised on a farm. Most of you were as well, or many of you were as well. And you know, if I was out in the field and saw a bush burning, but not being consumed, and then I heard a voice coming from it, I would know that's something that's not normal. I think I could automatically say, that's supernatural. That's supernatural. That's God. Because there is no other explanation. There is none. Skeptics try to explain it away in many different ways. But if Moses was a man who was an experienced shepherd, he'd been doing that for 40 years, he's not going to be taken aback by something that's normal. But there's something he immediately noticed. You know, it's quite a change. Quite a change from Moses. He was raised royalty as Pharaoh's grandson, but then he killed a man in Egypt and he fled to Midian to escape punishment. And that's where we pick up with Moses today, 40 years later, when God speaks to him through this burning bush. He was tending sheep, and God started talking to him. Now, at this time, Moses was on a mountain that was called Horeb, Mount Horeb, which is in the southern part of what we now call the Sinai Peninsula. And the really interesting thing is that Mount Horeb is another name for Mount Sinai, where Moses would later receive the Ten Commandments. So it's like Moses went full circle in his ministry. From here at the burning bush to bring in the Ten Commandments to the children of Israel is just full circle. But look again at what God said to Moses. Moses, Moses. And he said to him, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near, take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. That's my focus today. Do we have that reverence and awe for God? Do we have that reverence and awe that God demanded and Moses exhibited? God told Moses, take your sandals off your feet. That was a sign of reverence. And look again at that last passage I just read. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. I want you to think about your reverence for God. Do you have that reverence? You know, one thing that's really bothered me over the last 25 or 30 years, maybe even longer, has been that loss of reverence for God. I think it's interesting that many of our newer translations of the scriptures render that Hebrew word Yahweh as Lord, but in a special font. And that tries to capture in our modern English translation the reverence that the Old Testament Hebrews had for God's name. They wouldn't even speak his name because he is holy. Devout Jews still continue that practice today. They'll use other words such as Adonai to refer to God. But Yahweh is considered that personal name for God, and they won't utter it. And it all goes back to Exodus chapter 20, verse 7 in the Ten Commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. So where does that leave you and me? Do we have that same reverence that God demanded, that Moses showed? On the one hand, I can't comprehend just how awesome and powerful God is. I'm a finite creature. I cannot totally comprehend the infinite. But probably because of how I was raised spiritually, and folks, my mom and dad did the best they could to make sure that I was raised with a fear of the Lord, I cannot imagine not calling his name. My question to you is, do we or do you consider everything about God holy? I think over time we have desensitized our reverence for God, and that's something our culture has done to us. It's become so commonplace to flippantly refer to God, such as saying, "Oh my God," or writing out OMG, which means the same thing, or I swear to God. I hope I haven't crossed the spiritual boundary with saying those things. But so many people use those, or will refer to God as that big guy or the man upstairs. It scares me. Shouldn't we be more careful on how we refer to God? You know, a popular gospel song back in the 70s was one that's been covered many times by artists even since that time. The chorus says, "For he is more than just a swear word, more than just an I don't care word. How can we use his name so recklessly? Our only hope is in this one word. Whosoever may come word. He's more than just a swear word. He's the precious Son of God." Do we have that reverence? And then that same idea is found in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 8, the next of the Ten Commandments, where God told the children of Israel, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy." Now we know that Jesus came to fulfill the law and the prophets, but we also know that the earliest church met on the first day of the week to commemorate the resurrection. But the principle is still there. Do we approach worshiping God reverently? Far too often I know people just showing up haphazardly. Or I hear people say, "I couldn't be there because I had things to do." Folks, I've served as preaching minister, 7 different churches in 3 different states over my lifetime. And I've heard that phrase at every single one of them, or something like it. I had something to do. I just want to scream. Do you realize what you have just said? You just have things to do that are more important than worshiping God? There's so much more I could say about that, but time won't allow me to today. I do want to ask you to do one thing, though. Prayerfully consider how you view God. Is He just one that you try to fit into your schedule? Or is He the Holy One who demands awe and reverence just like He did to Moses? You're going to have to truthfully answer that, either now or before God sometime in the future. And I believe it's best to address it now and rectify if need be. Folks, I love you very much. I'll see you Sunday at Maxwell Christian Church.